The name Devastator sounds like a threat, like something built to leave ships burning and oceans boiling. But here's the cruel twist. This airplane became famous for the opposite. It didn't earn its legend by tearing the enemy apart. It earned it by getting torn apart, almost wiped out in a single unforgettable morning in the Pacific. So the question isn't just, was it bad? The real question is, did it ever have a moment when it actually did the job it was designed to do? And if it did, how did it go from state-of-the-art to dead on arrival so fast? That's what we're doing here, step by step. How it was born, what it was built to be, and what really happened when history finally called its bluff. Back in 1934, the US Navy's carrier force was still a small club, just a handful of big-deck ships that mattered. And the aircraft they were expected to fight with, a lot of them were still biplanes. 2 wings, open-air thinking, and performance that was already starting to look dated even before the shooting began. But the Navy wasn't standing still. Carrier aviation was expanding, and new flat-tops were on the calendar. Ships expected to join the fleet before 1941. That meant the old torpedo planes weren't just behind. They were about to become a liability. So the Navy put out the call for a new torpedo bomber. It had to carry the Mk XIII torpedo or haul bombs, 500-pounders, even smaller 100-pound loads. And it had to do it with a Pratt & Whitney XR-18 3060, rated around 900 horsepower. Once that requirement hit the street, multiple companies jumped in with proposals, because whoever won wasn't just building an airplane, they were building the Navy's next carrier strike weapon. When the proposals came in, the Navy didn't take long to start trimming the field, because some of what they got was already living in the past. Great Lakes showed up with a biplane. In 1934, that wasn't just old-fashioned, it was a dead end. The performance wasn't there, and the Navy knew it. Hall went the other direction and pitched a seaplane-style concept, but that simply didn't fit what the Navy needed on a carrier deck. It wasn't the right tool for the job. That left Douglas standing there with the answer that mattered, the XTBD-1. And the key point is this: Douglas didn't treat it like a fixed idea. They were willing to rework the design hard, changing it dramatically from the early drawings to push it into the modern category the Navy was clearly reaching for. By 1935, the XTBD-1 looked like it came from the next decade. It was an all-metal, low-wing monoplane with an enclosed cockpit, already a major break from the biplane mindset. Then Douglas stacked on features the Navy was still learning to trust. Hydraulically folding wings, the first time that idea was proposed to the US Navy, plus semi-retractable landing gear and wheel brakes, which were still viewed with caution because carrier landings could punish anything that grabbed too hard. And it didn't just look modern on a hangar floor. The prototype went through months of Navy evaluation, flown at Dahlgren, then the Norfolk Experimental Naval Air Station, before the moment that really mattered. Carrier trials at NAS North Island, and then aboard USS Lexington, starting December 5, 1935. After 13 deck landings and takeoffs, the project officers reported it was excellent for carrier work, absorbing landings well, with better than expected slow speed control. The Navy still demanded tweaks: a taller canopy, the oil cooler moved under the starboard wing, the port-side carburetor intake deleted, and a fixed tail wheel. After that, testing showed nearly 200 miles per hour clean, 120 miles per hour cruising with a full bomb load, about 100 miles per hour with a Mk XIII torpedo, 435 miles range with the torpedo, 700 miles with bombs, and a 19,700-foot service ceiling. Production moved fast. Between 1936 and 1937, the Navy accepted the type into service and placed a contract for 114 aircraft, while the original prototype didn't retire quietly. It stayed in the system as a flying test bed, the airplane you kept around when you still had things to prove, fix, or measure. What the fleet got was something it had never really operated before: the Navy's first all-metal, low-wing torpedo bomber in front-line carrier squadrons. And it wasn't a small machine. The TBD had real presence on a flight deck, with those distinctive, wavy, rippling wing surfaces that made it instantly recognizable even in grainy photos. In the air, pilots found a split personality. On approach, it could come aboard slow, which carriers loved. Cleaned up, no external stores, it was considered surprisingly nimble for its size. But loaded for war, it was a different conversation. Hang a torpedo or heavy bombs under it, and the performance penalty was obvious. Armament was straightforward and very mid-30s Navy. A forward-firing .30 caliber machine gun, sometimes upgraded to a .50 caliber, plus a flexible rear gun for defense. The whole point, though, was the payload. Either a Mk XIII torpedo or the earlier Mk XIII, with the torpedo's nose sticking out in the slipstream, adding drag, or bombs. It could carry 100-pound bombs on wing racks and 500 or 1,000-pound bombs on the centerline rack. And for level attacks, it used a Norden bomb sight, with the bombardier lying prone to work it, and the Navy being so protective of that hardware that public photos were often staged to keep it out of view. In 1939, the Navy even flirted with a weird offshoot, a long-range maritime patrol version. The TBD-1 had ditched its landing gear and sat on two huge EDO floats, braced with extra struts like a flying bridge truss. On paper, it was a way to give the fleet more ocean eyes without waiting for a brand new design. The tests actually went fine. Performance only dropped by roughly 20 miles per hour, and the reports carried that dry, almost dark humor. Basically, the airplane wasn't trying to kill, drown, or cripple its own crew just for showing up. There was even talk of export, the Netherlands, the Flying Dutchman angle, until Germany invaded in 1940, and the whole idea evaporated overnight. The prototype didn't go to waste, though. It became something more important: a flying testbed for trying to fix the Navy's real nightmare, the Mk XIII torpedo. In 1937, VT3 received the first TBD on October 5th, and the upgrade from the Great Lakes TG2 came with a steep learning curve. The new airplane brought hydraulically folding wings that had to be locked, electric control and release gear for stores, split-edge flaps, and retractable landing gear, things the TG2 simply didn't have. Accidents and near misses followed, and VT3 became an informal troubleshooting shop for the squadrons behind them. The peacetime attrition is stark. From July 1938 to December 1941, VT2, VT3, and VT6 each lost 6 aircraft. VT5 lost 8, and VS-71 lost 2. Mid-air collisions, ramp strikes, takeoff/landing mishaps, and airplanes lost at sea. A hard stall and an engine short on low-speed recovery didn't help, and neither did thin training, especially secondary pilots with only a few dozen hours. Still, once mastered, the TBD earned praise. As rugged as a pickup truck, easy to take off and land, and maneuverable if you stayed out of the stall. By the time the shooting started, the Devastator wasn't losing for one single reason. It was getting crushed by 3 problems that stacked on top of each other, and together they turned a 1937 winner into a 1942 casualty. First, technology moved faster than the airplane did. In 1937, about 206 miles per hour looked respectable for a carrier torpedo bomber. By 1940, that speed wasn't just a little slow. It was the difference between slipping in and getting run down, especially once enemy fighters and shipboard defenses improved. Second, the weapon it carried was unreliable. The Mk XIII torpedo had a reputation for missing in every way that matters: running too deep, porpoising, veering off, failing to detonate. In 1940 training, the success rate was so poor it became a fleet-wide headache. You can't build a combat record when your main punch doesn't land. Third, the Navy's peacetime attack doctrine pushed crews into a trap: low-level runs, smoke screens, and close-range drops. Critics pointed out the obvious. That approach broadcast your position, slowed the attack profile, and kept you in the enemy's gun envelope longer. Some officers argued for higher altitude coordination, pairing dive bombing with torpedo attacks. And the irony? Japan at the time had very little effective shipboard radar. Yet the US didn't fully realize how blind the enemy could be, and kept training for a fight that looked different than the one they actually had. Once the war began, the Devastator's first combat months didn't look like the legend people remember. It flew a handful of anti-submarine patrols and island strike missions, and the results were thin. The airplane could carry bombs, but level bombing from a torpedo plane, especially against small, moving targets, quickly earned a reputation as awkward and ineffective, the kind of thing crews did because there wasn't a better option in front of them. Then came the Battle of the Coral Sea, May 7th to 8th, 1942, and for one day, the TBD finally looked like what the Navy had promised itself it would be. On May 7th, US carriers struck the Japanese light carrier Shoho. This was the textbook version of a carrier strike: dive bombers and torpedo planes working the same target, forcing the ship to dodge in multiple directions, compressing its options. And in a rare moment of cooperation from the universe, the Mk XIII torpedo behaved. Devastators scored multiple torpedo hits, the dive bombers added their own punishment, and Shoho went down quickly. If you want the Devastator's high point, this is it. One clean, coordinated strike where the weapon actually worked. But the next day snapped the story back to reality. On May 8th, attacks went after Shokaku, and the Mk XIII returned to form. Misses, poor performance, and little to show for the drops. Add in weather, imperfect timing, and attacks that weren't as tightly synchronized, and the Devastator's moment was gone almost as soon as it arrived. Less than a month later came Midway, June 4th, 1942, and it was catastrophic. Out of 45 Devastators available across Enterprise, Hornet, and Yorktown, 41 were ready and launched. The strike groups went in disconnected, rendezvous plans broke down, and VT-8 in particular ended up lost or effectively without fighter escort. They came in low, just as Doctrine had trained them to do, and they ran straight into a thick combat air patrol of Zeros. The loss rate was horrifying. Only a handful came back, roughly 90% casualties. And yet, it wasn't pointless. By dragging the Zeros and a huge amount of defensive fire down low, the Devastators helped create the opening the dive bombers needed. An opening that contributed to 3 of Japan's 4 frontline carriers being hit and put out of action that day. After Midway, the Navy didn't debate the TBD's future for long. It was pulled from frontline carrier squadrons, and what remained of the type drifted into patrol and training work, hanging on into 1943 and 1944. Useful for teaching procedures, not for leading strikes. And that's the fair verdict. Calling it the worst is too easy. The airplane itself was flyable and workable, but it was trapped. Outpaced by 1940-era fighters, shackled to a torpedo that too often failed, and pushed by a doctrine that demanded low, exposed runs. Even when crews dropped again and again, the number that mattered, hits, stayed painfully low. If the Mk XIII had been dependable, and if strike coordination had been tighter, the Devastator's story might read very differently. Instead, it vanished. No original TBD survives today. What you see now are full-scale replicas, including aircraft built for Midway, 2019, with one displayed aboard the USS Midway Museum. Stand-ins for a machine that became famous the hardest way possible.